Thank you all for being here today. We're just going to let people have a few more moments to join, and then we'll start. We're just giving folks a few moments to join us, and then we'll be starting with the event. Welcome to today's event. DEI at 5 years, a 360-degree view, and is brought to you by Voices of the Staff's Advancing Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Network team. I am Felice Gonzalez. I'm a co-facilitator of the ADEI team and a staff member at the School of Education. I'm a light-skinned Latina woman with short curly brown hair and brown eyes, and I'm wearing a red shirt under a brown jacket. The white wall and a mirror as my background. So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Jessica Garza, today's event moderator. Dr. Garza is here as the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Manager for the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts at the University of Michigan. She received her doctorate in sociology from Michigan State University in 2008. And she supports the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Professional Development in the design, implementation, and ongoing sustainability of DEI strategic goals. In addition to overseeing the college's annual DEI strategic plan, Dr. Garza provides consulting, training, and crisis management support for the Ellison Dean's Office and departments around emergent DEI-related issues. She has consulted with and trained thousands of participants, including staff, faculty, and students across more than 100 different disciplines and industries. Training topics have included introductory DEI, self-awareness, building inclusive workspaces, best hiring practices, implicit bias and microaggressions, racial literacy, bystander intervention, intercultural responsiveness, inclusive leadership, and inclusive teaching. Prior to joining the University of Michigan, Dr. Garza held a joint position in the Department of Sociology and the Office for Inclusion and Intercultural Initiatives at Michigan State University. Thank you, Dr. Garza, for your participation in today's DEI Summit event and your ongoing DEI work on campus. And because the week that it is, go blue.
I always tell people I have love in my heart for two. That's the best inclusion answer, right? So thank you so much. My name is Dr. Jessica Garza. I am a white woman I wear today a mustard colored jewel toned blouse. I have very long gray hair and I wear purple glasses. It is my honor to introduce our distinguished panelists today, beginning with Dr. David Brown, who is the Associate Vice President and Associate Dean for Health Equity and Inclusion at Michigan Medicine and Associate Professor of Pediatric Otolaryngology at Michigan Medicine. Dr. Brown leads the Office for Health Equity and Inclusion at Michigan Medicine, which implements the University of Michigan Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Plan, provides training to advance diversity and inclusion, and provides numerous healthcare pipeline and mentorship programs. He has successfully recruited many medical students, house officers, and faculty to the University of Michigan Medical School. As a leader at Michigan Medicine, Dr. Brown is an executive sponsor of the Anti-Racism Oversight Committee, AROC, initiated in June 2020. Dr. Brown has been a faculty member at Michigan Medicine since 2011 and was the medical director of the Pediatric Otolaryngology Clinic and Multidisciplinary Aerodigestive Clinic, and a founding member and faculty lead of the Otolaryngology Essential Skills Simulation Bootcamp. He's a member of the Association of American Medical Colleges Group on Diversity and Inclusion, and formerly served as the Central Region Representative for the AAMC GDI from 2017 to 2019. Dr. Brown is the chair of the Society of University Otolaryngologists Diversity Committee. Dr. Brown is a member of Michigan Medicine Global Reach, Research, Education, and Collaboration in Health, and is part of the otolaryngology team that travels to Ghana multiple times a year to collaborate on research projects and advance the surgical skills of local Ghanaian otolaryngologists. Dr. Brown graduated from Brown University and Harvard Medical School. He completed his residency in otolaryngology, head and neck surgery at the University of Michigan, and fellowship in pediatric otolaryngology at the Children's Hospital of Boston. Prior to returning to Michigan, he was on the faculty at Johns Hopkins Hospital, where he was the Otolaryngology Residency Associate Program Director and winner of the 2005 George T. Nager Award for Excellence in Teaching. He worked from 2008 to 11 at the Medical College of Wisconsin, where he won the Otolaryngology Faculty Teaching Award. He was recently honored with the Harvard Medical School 2020 Distinguished Alumni Service Award for co-creating an alumni mentorship program for medical students underrepresented in medicine. Dr. Brown enjoys classical music and is a founding member, principal flutist, and 2018 concerto competition winner of the University of Michigan Life Sciences Orchestra. Thank you, Dr. Brown, for being here.
Wow, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Garsha. That was like the best introduction I think I've ever had, and you pronounce otolaryngology correctly every time. So that's amazing. I had to practice that word before I applied in this specialty as well. So I'm a mixed race man with olive colored skin, with wavy black hair that is graying. I'm in my home office that has a green background on the back wall. I'm wearing a maize and blue striped shirt and a blue sweater with a block M in the left upper chest, go blue. I'm really happy to be here today. Thank you for having me. Since I had that long introduction, I'm gonna keep this very brief. My reflection over the last 5 years is that, I'm really happy that we're actively and ongoingly talking about DEI issues regularly now, whereas we weren't doing this beforehand. We have a much bigger vocabulary that we can share our experiences and express ourselves. We still have a lot of work to do to unpack decades and centuries of injustices, but we're giving more and more sound and amplification to marginalized voices. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll go to Lauren Davis, who is our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Community at the School for Environment and Sustainability, SEAS, where she serves as a strategic advisor, collaborating with faculty, staff, students, alumni, and community members to develop, promote, and advance the DEI strategic goals of SEAS. Lauren has over 13 years of experience at the University of Michigan. Prior to her role at SEAS, Lauren was the Assistant Director of the School of Social Work's DEI office, as well as a Student Services Coordinator in their Office of Student Services, where she was involved with admissions, recruitment and retention, advising, academic support, and helping students navigate wellness concerns. Lauren is a lecturer in social work, teaching courses related to diversity and social justice, racial equity, and generalist social work practice, as well as a field instructor for macro-level social work students, providing training on concepts around community engagement, evaluation and assessment, and strategies for advancing DEI and anti-racist approaches in higher education settings. Lauren is a proud Michigan Wolverine, receiving her BA in psychology and sociology and a Master of Social Work from the University of Michigan. She has been a member of teams across campus and nationally that work for strong inclusion and equity. Her passion is for creating environments where everyone can thrive and be successful. She believes that DEI is central to the mission of every organization and that everyone has an essential role to play in achieving our DEI goals. Lauren, thank you for being with us today.
Great, thank you so much and for that introduction. And after hearing Dr. Brown's, I feel like I got some more work to do. That's great. So thank you for having me here today. And I'm going to talk from the perspective of the work that I've done at the School of Social Work. So I'm only about a month into my time at SEAS, but also carrying a lot of what I've learned in social work to this new role. I think having been a part of the DEI team at social work for the entire 5 years, it was really beautiful to see where we started and sort of where we landed after the course of 5 years. I think we came a really long way. And one of the things that was really central for us is that the work was not the work of the DEI office alone, but really thinking about how, as a community, we were all going to be able to contribute to the efforts and goals around DEI. So it was a lot of community building, building relationships, which I think is really central to the DEI work. And I would say one of the things that I'm, most proud of is the fact that as a school, we know we had a lot of work to do. And I think as a whole around the DEI work, as Dr. Brown mentioned, yes, we still have a lot to do, but I think it is important to celebrate what we've accomplished. And, for us, being responsive to the changing needs around DEI, given what's happening in the world, I think, with everything that's going on in the world, DEI is even more relevant and sort of elevated in the conversation. And anti-racism became even more in focus in the work that we were doing in response to COVID and police brutality that we were seeing. And so being able to shift and navigate as things change. And I think I look forward to seeing how we continue to shift and navigate as we move forward in the next 5 years.
Thank you, Lauren. And could you just real briefly describe your visual appearance today?
Thank you so much. I forgot about that. So I am a Black woman with short natural hair. I'm wearing a burgundy dress and I have a white background with a Michigan plaque on the wall. Once again, showing my Michigan pride. Go Blue.
Thank you so much. Go Blue. Next, we have Nicole Figueroa, even writing it phonetically. Let me say it again. Next, we have Nicole Figueroa. There we go. Nicole Figueroa is an MSN, an RN, an AHNBC, HWNCBC, and the nurse leader for the Wellbeing and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Michigan Medicine Health System. Nicole received her BSN from the University of Detroit Mercy and received her Master's of Science in Nursing with a concentration of Advanced Holistic Nursing from Florida Atlantic University. Previous to starting her role as nurse leader for Wellbeing and DEI, her career was spent as a child psychiatric nurse and the clinical director of the Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Unit at C.S. Mott Children's Hospital. Her work has included education of nurses around clinical presence and reflective practice, particularly with patients and families who are struggling emotionally during their hospitalizations. She's passionate about creating system-wide approaches that support bold and inclusive work environments where people from all backgrounds feel welcome, along with prioritizing and reducing stigma around mental health needs for nurses. Nicole believes that through educating nurses on how to support themselves around the emotional parts of the work, we can create a health system where healthcare providers can flourish and subsequently our patients and families can truly heal. Nicole, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Just need to find that unmute button. Thank you for that. Hi, my name is Nicole Figueroa. I am a light-skinned Latina. I have curly brown hair, glasses. I'm wearing a pink sweater and a black undershirt. And behind me is a white wall, and you can see some pictures behind me of family and people that I love, because I think you got to keep them close, even when we're at work. So it's wonderful to be amongst these esteemed folks here on this panel. I feel honored to be here. Just kind of to think about what we've done in nursing, very much like Lauren said, we have come a long way in nursing. We have over 6,000 nurses at the University of Michigan or Michigan Medicine. So one of the largest work groups. And sometimes when you have some of the largest work groups, we're the hardest to kind of pull together. And I think when I think back in our 5-year plan, going from a clinical nursing director role and looking at my unit and the work that we would do just kind of as a unit, and then now into the system level role, really it's been wonderful to have a role created. And then also thinking through how can we align all of the work that has been done system-wide, campus-wide into the work that we can do at Michigan Medicine. Some of the things that I'm most proud of is we've now just created a governance committee that is focused in DEI and nursing. So getting it kind of streamlined and hardlined into the work that we do each and every day. Looking at opportunities where we give care, so in the last year, we have had a nurse who looked at pressure injuries on darker skin, which may seem silly to kind of people, some people like, oh, how do we look, differently? But in nursing school, we were taught only to assess on light skin, which is just wild to me. And so we have some amazing projects that are looking at our diversity, equity, and inclusion, how we give care to everyone, and particularly in some instances where people have been marginalized. And so we've had some beautiful work that's happening. I can't wait to see the next 5 years in nursing, and excited to learn from so much that has been going on institutionally and continue the kind of venture into where we will be as nursing at Michigan, and diversifying our workplace and making it an inclusive place to work.
Thank you, Nicole, for that introduction, that overview. Wonderful to hear. Our final panelist to introduce is Dr. Robert M. Sellers, Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer. He's also the Charles D. Moody Collegiate Professor of Psychology. Robert M. Sellers received his Bachelor of Science degree in Psychology from Howard University and his doctorate in Personality Psychology from the University of Michigan. He's responsible for overseeing the university's 5-year strategic plan for diversity and inclusion, and serves as a principal advisor to the president as a member of the university's executive leadership team. Dr. Sellers works with the provost on matters related to diversity at the university, as well as a broad range of academic issues, including budget, faculty tenure and promotions, and student enrollment. He oversees operations of 3 central administrative units. Dr. Sellers provides strategic leadership to increase access and success for all students, recruit and retain diverse faculty, and develop academic programs that prepare all students for success in a diverse world. Prior to joining the Provost's office, Dr. Sellers was the chair of the University of Michigan Department of Psychology. His research interests include ethnicity, racial and ethnic identity, personality and health, athletic participation, and personality. He has published several research articles and book chapters that examine factors associated with the psychosocial development of African American student athletes. Dr. Sellers, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Jessica, for that wonderful introduction. And it is a great pleasure to be a part of this wonderful panel and this wonderful town hall meeting. I am an African-American male, dark-skinned in appearance, with relatively little hair on top and on the sides, and that which is there is pretty gray. I'm wearing glasses. I have a beard that's also pretty gray these days. I'm wearing a brown jacket with a shirt that is brown and white striped, and I am sitting in front of a artificial backdrop of the Korean War Memorial with a picture of the wall that says "Freedom is not free." Again, it is my pleasure to be here, both as a part of the panel, but also as part of our DEI journey, particularly as it relates to the 5-year strategic plan. It's hard for me to imagine that we have gotten this far when I think back to when we first started. Similar to Lauren and David and Nicole's comments, I'm extremely proud of the work that has happened so far. We have made tremendous progress. At the same point in time, it's also important to acknowledge we still have a long way to go. like any journey worth taking, it means that there are going to be bumps and dips along the way, and there definitely have been. But I am here to say, and to again, most proud of the fact that this university is not the same university it was 5 years ago. That the work in DEI is not only a model in higher education with regards to the transformation, it's also, I think, an important model in terms of the way in which the university itself can and needs to function in the future. There's no other initiative, structure, practice, etc., that I am aware of in my 25 plus years associated with the university that has had such input and such a wide range of influence at the university. And so for that, to borrow from Lauren's point earlier, it's extremely important that we take this time to celebrate. As we finish our 5-year plan, it marks an opportunity for us to take stock in what we've done, to learn from the things that haven't worked, and to build on the things that have worked, but to also galvanize our strength for the next phase of the process and the next step in the work to be done. So I look forward to engaging with the panel and most importantly, the audience in having a conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sellers. And it's so wonderful already to hear an overview of what's happening in all of these spaces around campus. I joined the University of Michigan at the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts midstream. The DEI plan had already launched at that point, and it was inspiring to join that team, and it continues to be inspiring to be a part of that team. We've seen incredible investments around student and faculty recruitment and retention, considerable investment more recently on the staff experience. And our office in and of itself, where I work, did not exist prior to this plan. And so I am especially grateful that that became part of the program. So I look forward to hearing more. And what I'm going to do next, we have collected questions from staff who are interested in knowing more about DEI and the efforts happening around campus and our different units, and also with an eye towards what we can do better. And so I'm going to pose them in kind of in order of how they were coming up in the questions. So the questions that were submitted that repeated multiple times, the themes that came up multiple times, that's what I'll be drawing from. We will in no way get to all of the questions that were presented to us, but we're going to make sure that all of our panelists today have those questions to refer back to keep thinking about them, because they're all so important. And so the first question for our panelists is a question regarding what the university, what Michigan Medicine, or what smaller units are doing to ensure that Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color, as well as LGBTQIA and those with disabilities, are hired into key leadership positions. And so I'm going to offer this question first to Rob at the university level, and then ask David if you could step in with the Michigan Medicine perspective, and then we can fill in some gaps from there. So Rob, do you want me to repeat the question?
I think I got it. I'll try to repeat it, and if I missed it, then please correct me. So I think the question is, at the university level, what are we doing to create a more diverse leadership that represents the totality of who we are as a community and who we are as a society. So slightly rephrase that. So one of the things that we're doing is, as part of all of the search processes for executive officers, for deans, we are including in that process both our office to examine the candidate pool. We work with search committees to make sure that they begin throughout the process to create as diverse a pool as possible. And in many cases, we also include lessons on implicit bias and other things that we've learned through STRIDE and other some of the HR practices that we've learned in terms of how to reduce bias in the place. We also make sure that as part of the process that candidates have access to the DEI strategic plans for their units. And as part of the interview process, the search committees, as well as myself, and quite frankly, has happened throughout has become more organically a part of the process in and of itself. The candidates are questioned about their experience and their expertise and their skills with regards to issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've also worked to try to broaden ways in which we create pools. Our office has also worked to try to develop opportunities for development, professional development opportunities, particularly for members of the community who have traditionally not had access. So we partnered now with the University of Utah to develop a professional development program. It initially started with the National Center for Institutional Diversity. It's now moved to the University of Utah. We've helped sponsor staff and faculty to participate, and particularly staff and faculty with a demonstrated commitment to diversity, which we all know tends to be disproportionately traditionally underrepresented folks, to again provide more opportunities, et cetera. So really our focus has been both to create new programs and opportunities, to put in place procedures and processes to actually ingrain in the hiring process of leadership that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a core skill, core responsibility, and that we want to make the process as open as possible to try to get as diverse a set of candidates and ultimately a diverse set of leaders.
Thank you, Dr. Sellers. Dr. Brown?
Thank you very much. And we're doing some very similar things that Rob is doing at Central Campus. And we work closely with each other and share best practices bidirectionally. Some of the things that we've done is we created a faculty search toolkit that is actually in its second version, and HR is adapting this for staff as well as we speak. Within the toolkit, which is available online through our Office for Health, Equity, and Inclusion website, are the best practices for writing an inclusive job description, diverse advertisement, creating the recruitment committee, finding diverse candidates, educating the recruitment committee, including on biases in hiring and selection, including STRIDE, behavior-based interview questions, and a guideline for appropriate and inappropriate interview questions, which addresses things with LGBTQ community, disability, ability, race, and gender, questions that should be off limits. I also review the high-level search committee members to make sure that there's diversity on multiple levels. So for the super high level, I get a list of everyone before they're even invited and announced. And I make recommendations. These recommendations are really important because it not only allows for diverse representation and accountability, but also gives faculty and staff and sometimes learners an opportunity to understand what the process is like, and it helps them learn on their journey as they're starting to think about advancement into higher levels of leadership, to understand how these processes work from the inside. The high-level searches also have diversity questions. And during our recent search for a very high-level position in the hospital, an African-American woman from an outside institution was interviewing here and stated that she had never seen so much intentional diversity on a search committee and in multiple questions that were asked about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that was a kind of a feedback that was not expected, that at least from this person's point of view, that we're doing something right. We also have a process for advertising in national journals and through diverse email lists. Additionally, we have quite a few groups that we are helping to advance in leadership, because the question was also about leadership. So we have an Advancing Asians in Leadership work group, because we know that although Asians are well represented in our healthcare system, they are not well represented in leadership positions. And so this group has done a lot of work on advocacy, mentorship, and opportunities for supporting each other advancing. Sonia Jacobs and I work closely on many different opportunities. And one of the things we're about to reveal is a new group on advancing women and people of color into high-level leadership positions. We also have a strong advisory group for LGBTQ plus advancement that is presented to our senior leadership and is helpful for our faculty, staff, and learners, patients, and families. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. And Lauren or Nicole, would you like to speak to efforts at SEAS or in nursing?
I can hop in. Yeah, so, you know, a lot of the efforts that Rob mentioned are things that we did in social work and at SEAS. I think the only other piece that I just wanted to also reiterate is that, you know, thinking about career advancement is something that was really important. And so we looked at ways that we could provide mentorship opportunities and programs for faculty and staff to think about how they're progressing, and also thinking about what mentorship looks like, also depending on identity and how people are navigating their roles given their various backgrounds as well. And I did just want to also reiterate to Rob's point that I think one of the things that I have seen as we've moved along is this emphasis on a commitment to DEI within our job descriptions, and sort of embedding that within the process of this is the expectation that we have for all of our leaders, and so knowing what people have done, and also their willingness to continue to learn and engage, because no one is an expert in this, I don't think. And so someone's ability to continue to develop in that way, I think is key for our leadership moving forward.
And, you know, I think it's been so beautifully kind of articulated thus far by the other panelists, but just to kind of add, in nursing, you know, I think that our venture has been a little bit newer. I've been at the institution as a nurse for 13 years, and to watch this progression in the last 5 years has been beautiful. And as of late, we have our own kind of nursing recruitment retention in our department. And so we have embedded a lot of what Dr. Brown and Dr. Sellers have been talking about into our process. And what Lauren just spoke of around the mentorship, in a lot of our governance committees, we are starting to think through looking at mentorship opportunities for nursing leadership. Current state, it's not as diverse as we need it to be and want it to be, and finding ways to mentor and support people to get into leadership so that we do represent not only the patients that we serve, but also the nurses that we serve. In nursing, we have a large opportunity to diversify the workforce, and diversify people who are going into nursing, and then also people who are at the bedside, and then subsequently into our leadership. So I'd say it's one of our largest priorities going forward, and I'm really excited to see how things progress in our jobs going forward.
Thank you all for sharing that. And of course, the emphasis on DEI as a priority and an expectation for new hires, what we know is that translates to a significant increase in the odds of diverse recruitment, retention, and advancement for folks in the future, right? If you bring in people that are already committed to this, everything kind of snowballs from there. I do want to go back to the question that I think Lauren and Nicole really put their finger on, which is the importance of the pipeline. So how do we support the folks that are already here internally? And they both mentioned mentoring as a really important piece of that. There were a lot of questions, and we see this in LSA as well. It is top of mind for so many of our staff. It's a balancing act in that there are folks that would like to be eligible for leadership positions, but it's an issue of access, and it's an issue of opportunity for support. And so I want to kind of dovetail this with the next question, which is that in order to compete for these key leadership positions, our employees are often expected to have an advanced degree. However, the opportunities for professional development and continued education typically require time away from primary work responsibilities and or significant financial investment. And so what does the university, what is Michigan Medicine, or even in these individual units, what are folks doing to encourage and facilitate these opportunities in a way that is equitable?
I'll jump in.
Great.
So one of the things that let me back up a bit. So from the position that I sit in, it's clear, and actually I think for all of us, we hire very few people, if any. We promote very few people, if any. We teach very few people, if any. We engage with very few vendors, if any. All this to say is, as representatives in diversity, equity, inclusion, we don't have the buttons that change things. And it reminds me of something that was really important. And I don't say this as an excuse, but as a strategy, so that we understand what our strategy is. When I first took the position, my mentor, Charles Moody, who was the first person in this position, gave me two pieces of advice. And one of those pieces of advice was, make sure that when you take the position, that you make them do their job, that you don't do their job for them. They're not going to give you their paycheck, so they're not don't do their job for them. So to become a diverse, equitable, and inclusive university, it's not the DEI office, DEI leads, the DEI folks' job to do it. It is our job to create space, opportunity, capacity, knowledge, and energy around everybody in every position in the university acting in ways that are consistent with being more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive. And so sometimes that results in us creating unique programs that fit holes that exist. But most of the work that we do is really pushing different units, different services, different functions within the university to act in ways that are consistent with diversity, equity, and inclusion, to have that be a part of the strategy and this, most importantly, excuse me, the standard operating procedure of those units, functions, etc. Sorry. So with that said, what we've tried to do is, and one of the things that I think is really important for the next Chief Diversity Officer to work on it, is we are in a really important moment. One thing is very clear. In the context of COVID, there's going to be two pathways. One is to try to go back to before COVID, and then another is to try to go in a completely different direction, with COVID changing the trajectory of not only this university, but the larger society. And those units, those entities, organizations that attempt to go back are going to end up being at a competitive disadvantage. Those that see this as an opportunity to re-examine what we do and the way in which we do it are going to be the ones that are going to be competitively ahead. And in the context of DEI, now is a moment that, in the face of all the suffering and pain, may actually provide a much greater opportunity than we've ever had before. So when we started this process, it's very clear that the goal was to try to retrofit a university that was not necessarily designed for the vast majority of us here, and trying to change things to look more like, how do we fit what was originally designed for one particular purpose to be more inclusive in that process. At this moment, we have an opportunity to redesign the way in which we actually work for the future, and do so in a way in which diversity, equity, and inclusion is at the bottom line. It's not an add-on, it's not a retrofit, it is built into everything that we do. You see that in the context of staff with regards to what are we going to do with, now that we understand that the nature of work is going to look different from remote versus not remote. How do we think about this in ways that are more equitable and more inclusive, as opposed to just going back to the old way of doing things? How do we create new strategies that are accessible at the beginning, and not accessible as a way of accommodating, but accessible as a way of being inclusive from the very beginning, and how we frame things so that we'll end up with new approaches. And so one of the most important roles that I think we have is being in all of these different places and all of these different conversations, and making sure that we start with a vision that says, how do we support all of Michigan students, all of Michigan staff, all of Michigan faculty, and not simply how do we support the typical Michigan student, the typical Michigan staff, the typical Michigan faculty. And so with that, the nature of the change and the nature of the opportunities really lead us to a slightly different place than we're going to fix this here and we're going to fix this there, to really visioning what the next part of this university could be. And quite frankly, we would not have been able to do that prior to COVID, but COVID is forcing us to rethink a lot of different things. And it's important that we, as individuals who are pushing for a more equitable and inclusive institution, have that mindset and are at the table at the beginning of these conversations. So that's one of the things that I see in my role, is to make sure that as we're having those conversations at the leadership levels in the university, that DEI is not only at the table, but is a driving force in terms of what we're doing.
Can I make a brief comment on that? I know Dr. Sellers covered a lot, but like Dr. Sellers said, as kind of diversity leaders, we don't hold all the keys for doing everything, but in many ways we are important because we're the chief collaborative officers and chief connection officers to everyone, and helping them do their diversity work in their own areas and helping them understand what the opportunities are there. It is our job to be trusted individuals that people can come to and bring up concerns, and at the same time be valued and respected colleagues within the leadership ranks to bring up these issues so that they're addressed. To kind of answer the question at hand about degrees, this is important to partner with the human resources, because I've heard a lot from Michigan medicine staff that they have a lot of on the job training and experience that's worth more than the master's, so they've been doing this work for 10 years or 15 years, and that's more than a 1 or 2 year master's. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to rethink what we value as far as experiences and and academic merit for certain positions. And it might be a master's or equivalent work experience. So this is an opportunity for us to change the status quo of how we normally conduct business and searches.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just want to piggy right back on that point, just as and then I'll promise I'll be quiet for the next question. So this is a prime example. So the university has committed a significant amount of resources and a vision with the Center for Academic Innovation into the future of what education looks like. And it's not going to be as degree focused. You're talking about a number of different certificates. You're talking about a layering of the way in which we think about what is supported and needed with regards to work. These issues are also important issues as it relates to the vision for the next capital campaign in terms of, again, another large investment, a large focus of the future of the university. Well, I can promise you that if DEI is not a part of those conversations, there will be winners and losers. And traditionally, the traditional winners will continue to be in play and the traditional losers will be in play. But there's an opportunity to utilize this vision to help lower the playing field or lower the bars to level the playing field as really a tool of equity. And as opposed to thinking about how to fix it 6, 8, 9 years down the line when we see disparities come into play, now's an opportunity to actually think about this at the beginning. And to Minnie and CAI's credit, they have been working with NCID, they've been working with our office, other spaces around campus to begin to try to think about how we can incorporate those that direction and moving forward in the future. So it's important for us to not only impact what we're doing now, but most importantly, how do we win the future?
Thank you both for those very thoughtful answers. And I can tell you from responses we're getting from the audience, a lot of folks are very interested to hear that people are thinking about this and really hope we find some solutions. I think you've both highlighted an important factor here, which is, you know, our role as DEI leaders is to influence spaces where decisions are being made and to identify the gaps that are inevitably going to come up if we're not thinking about DEI from the very beginning. And so one option might be these certificates. I think one of the concerns in terms of equity, and seems to be echoed here in the feedback we're getting from the audience, is that there are particular you know, there's disparate spaces where folks of certain racial ethnic backgrounds, certain gender identities are more likely to be in positions where they don't have the kind of flexibility to step away from their work reality to go and pick up the certificate. So even if the certificate is available, am I actually allowed to leave my space to go do this? Is my supervisor going to allow me to do this? And so it's one that I think the next question I have for you feeds into. I know in LSA, we're trying to think about this as well. For folks that don't know, we have a brand new position, a Chief People Officer, who's really focused on increasing the quality of the work experience for staff, but also thinking about professional development and advancement opportunities, and considering the possibility of a career exploration center. Like, is there a space where staff can go and learn more about what are my options? What's the next step? What skills do I have? What am I going to need to get to the next step? Do I even want that next step? Maybe I want to pivot my career. How can I try that on before I take that jump? How can I do this without suffering any kind of retaliation? Is my supervisor going to support this? Right. And so understanding that messaging from leadership, right? Top leadership saying, we endorse this, we support this, we want you to do this, we expect supervisors to encourage folks to do this. I think all of that has to be wrapped up in thinking about the next step, right? That people really enjoy working here. They also want to advance. And so how do we make sure that everybody who wants to advance can do that? Because supervisors may have different answers on that, right? Which is where we get back to the equity issue. Anybody want to comment on that before I move on to the next question? Okay, we'll put a pin in that because the next question goes right back to it. And that is, again, thinking about, and Dr. Sellers, you brought up the lessons we've learned from COVID. And so this combines that with it. We've learned a lot in the last 2 years about the importance of flexible work environments, work-life balance, and the real toll that burnout can take on staff and their ability to do their job well. As we think about taking those lessons forward, the reality is that a disproportionate number of staff with in-person work requirements are women and people of color. How will your unit or the university or Michigan Medicine ensure that they have the same considerations around work-life balance, hybrid opportunities, mental health, burnout? How do we ensure that everyone is given those same considerations regardless of their job title and rank? And is that even possible?
So from our, in some ways, I think I tried to address some of that question in the sense that the way that our unit will address it is by trying to be in the conversations around what the next phase of work looks like, and to advocate that diversity, equity, and inclusion is an important part of that. But I do think it's important to always understand and unpack equity versus equality. So equity doesn't mean the same. Oftentimes we confuse the two, and trying to make sure that we address issues of inequality and or inequity, I should say, whenever and wherever we can, and making sure that as we think about new policies, new practices, and new procedures, that it is broad, open, and inclusive. So when we start thinking about new technology, instead of trying to find out retrofits in terms of whether or not it's accessible to all members of our community, regardless of various ability status, that should be the first requirement as we are developing new ways of communicating, new ways of working, that we start with as close as we can to universal access, universal opportunity, with a general mindset of universal design as our goal, and not accommodation, not again, as I keep going back to the retrofitting with respect to that. Similarly, when we're thinking about our policies and procedures with regards to how we work, are we thinking about that in the context of childcare issues? Are we thinking about this in the context of how does this what really matters in terms of work and job requirement versus what are new ways that we could do this that might not look the same across all spaces, but will provide more opportunities for more people to do more things than they would have otherwise if we rethought about what it takes to actually do this job. And so it's challenging because it flies in some ways against each other, because in some spaces the same title might actually require two very different ways in approaching work, and at one level look like, oh, well, that's not equal because it's not the same, but it is more equitable because one way in which you utilizes the work provides one person an opportunity to contribute that they wouldn't have otherwise if we defined it that everyone doing this job is exactly the same. So that's a challenge that we will have to face and grapple with in the future, but it's important that we begin to have that as we're thinking about what the future holds.
I would love to check in with Nicole on this. Nicole, the last 2 years have been unreal in the burden and responsibilities and risk of burnout for our nurses especially. And given your background on mental health, I'm curious, what are folks doing over there in your unit right now to think about this? We need them obviously more than ever. How do you make sure that they're being taken care of?
Thank you for that. I think that these past nearly 2 years have been extremely impactful in the healthcare system in general to all of our kind of healthcare workers. And speaking from a nurse's perspective, I would say that burnout and the mental health, really, I would say looking at depression, anxiety, and all of our PTSD in our nursing staff is of highest priority. In fact, something that our chief nurse executive has kind of put as the highest priority for myself and for a lot of our executive team going forward. And so, I think of it, and just like Dr. Sellers was saying, we have an opportunity to think about going forward how we want to redefine things. Burnout and compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma have been present and ever present in our healthcare workers before COVID. And now we have this kind of laying of a pandemic, how that impacted family life, how that impacted work life and the experiences that they had. And so from my standpoint, I think that's kind of our labor of love in the next years coming forward. And we are looking specifically on increasing our support services through our Office of Counseling and Workplace Resilience, along with interventions and training specific to our healthcare workers around this. And in our area, particularly around the COVID time that was given through HR, it's the first time that I've seen the institution give kind of time to people to care for their families, to care for things with no questions asked. And as a person who's kind of always had to be here, as healthcare providers, you kind of have to be at work, unfortunately, because there's not that opportunity to have that kind of, at home kind of work from home ability when you're seeing, when you're in the inpatient world and seeing patients as a nurse. And so I think that, looking at different ways we can provide, flexibility to our healthcare workers as well as a recovery. And I think that's got to be our priority. And you look at the layered kind of traumas people have had in their lives and how this is kind of affecting them as well is very important for us to look through that lens as well, that kind of trauma that people have had experienced with before this pandemic and then now how that's compounded it. So.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to move to one more question before we start taking questions from our audience. And this focuses on the representation and advocacy and support for members of our community with disabilities. And I will start by saying in LSA, we are hiring 2 brand new pilot positions, accessibility coordinators whose sole function, full-time positions, is to provide internal support for our employees in LSA with disabilities. Through the course, I've been involved in that search process. It's been incredibly enlightening to me in so many ways, and I'm so excited for all the transitions that are coming to our college. But through the course of those conversations, Michigan Medicine has been highlighted multiple times as really doing a phenomenal job in this space. And so I'd like to direct this question first to Dr. Brown and then open it up to others. Could you tell us what is Michigan Medicine doing to ensure that the viewpoints of individuals with disabilities are fully and consistently incorporated into your DEI work?
Thank you very much for that question. This is like everything that we're doing is still a work in progress. When we first started our DEI strategic plan, one of the things we reinstituted was resource groups. Those years ago, the resource groups went away, or the employee resource groups, and we reinstituted them. And in fact, what we did is in the past, they have been largely staff. But this time we open it up to everyone at Michigan Medicine, so faculty, staff, and learners, because the experiences are sometimes overlapping with all of them. And so one of the very first resource groups that we developed was the Disability Resource Group. And Clarissa Love, who used to be one of our DI leads at the university and at Michigan Medicine, was one of the people who helped lift that off the ground. And some of the things that they have done really well is to be very organized in their programs and having important speakers and bringing up important points. And so I've also myself relied on them in many occasions when I needed them to participate on important committees. For example, we're building a new hospital and we have been renovating spaces. And one of the things that was brought to my attention from this group and others is that we have spaces that are ADA compliant, but they're not necessarily accessible by all individuals. And so as we're started to build new buildings, I've made sure that each of the committees that talks about the development and the strategy for the building has a disability advocate on there intentionally to make sure that we're creating spaces that people can get around. And not to say that the rest of Michigan Medicine is perfect, because we still have spaces that are challenging to navigate throughout the system. So we also have many other resource groups as well. In addition, we have like a Black resource group, a spirituality resource group, working families and veterans amongst an LGBTQ resource group. And so we're actually figuring out ways that we could have each of these resource groups bring their concerns and the opportunities for improvement forward to the leadership. So some of the things we were thinking about just prior to COVID coming out is having many of the members of those groups meet with Dean Runge during one of the Runge breakfasts, but COVID changed that because we weren't eating with each other anymore. But there's still opportunities for them to present to different leadership. We're also having a meeting, I think, coming up very soon with our disability group and our LGBTQ plus resource group, because those two groups have done a lot of work and to learn from each other. And it gave me an idea that we should probably figure out ways of all of our resource groups kind of having their leadership kind of coming together to learn from each other. One of the biggest challenges in the work that we do is that we often do the work in the silos of our own identities or our own work groups. And as much as we can kind of break down those silos, it helps lift us all up, the disability group and other groups, if we start thinking about what other groups are thinking about and how they're approaching it. So thank you very much for that question.
And I'll open it up to the other panelists as well.
Yeah, I'll just, briefly say, I think coming from the School of Social Work, I think, speaking to Dr. Brown's last point, we very much try to take an intersectional approach to this work, but also know that accessibility is an area that I think we have a long way to go. We did form a access and inclusion group that was comprised of students, faculty, and staff. So it brought together the different constituencies to see how these things are playing out within the school at a policy level, but what sort of the day-to-day experiences are like as well, and really trying to embed it more deeply within the structures of our strategic plan. We do have resources that are there. So our students are completing field work. And when you think about accessibility and the range of accessibility needs, the students are going out into the community and working in organizations that may or may not be as well equipped to be able to support their learning in different environments and what their learning needs might be. We have advocates that are working through our field office to really sort of support not only the student, but also those who are supporting their learning outside of the school, because we know that some of it takes resources to be able to think about providing what someone needs to really be able to thrive in whatever setting they're in. And so I think this is an area that we're continuing to grow and think about, and also making sure that that perspective is represented at our highest levels of leadership as well. So having students who are bringing this perspective, as well as faculty and staff, as we're making decisions around accessibility needs within the school and how we can embed them within the process, making sure that we're touching in with those key contacts to make sure that we're thinking about it from that perspective, but also like within the broader range of our DEI goals, because as I said, it is intersectional and these things all connect with one another.
Thank you, Lauren. And Dr. Sellers, could you talk a little bit about the idea board and how that's been going and things the university has taken from the work that's already been done?
So we started the student idea board, I guess it's been almost 3 years ago, which was part of one of the efforts that we sort of see the DEI strategic plan as a broad effort to address diversity, equity, and inclusion across campus, but recognizing that different constituents have different needs and different opportunities. If we also focus specifically on the needs of those communities, we began to develop a working group, work task group, first with our Native American students, where we bring together members of the community, as well as allies, as well as administrators who work in areas that provide service to the communities, to come together with a set of ideas, plans, specific goals that are short to medium term issues that we can address and work together to try to address, to bring people together, quite frankly, who oftentimes aren't in the same room, that don't get a chance to have the kinds of conversations and to actually develop specific kinds of actionable items. And so the Student Idea Board was our second effort, focusing specifically on the disabilities community. And produced a report and a set of actionable items that we are currently working through. Everything from suggestions with regards to revamping SSD to larger initiatives such as developing a disability studies, issues related to the environment, all representation across the board. And so we see this as a framework, a blueprint created, constructed by a variety of stakeholders that is really a list of things that we work to create. So we just finished this past week our first conference to lay out the progress of the work in the anti-ableist, towards an anti-ableist academy, which has been a tremendous success and has led to a number of important, not only conversations, but actual policies and procedural changes. And I'm particularly excited about the buzz around developing a disability studies framework at the university, which again begins to move us away from accommodation to really inclusion and breadth. And like I've been saying before, it's not what we have the ability to do is oftentimes shine light, to bring folks together, to convene behind the scenes, to push and create synergies that otherwise weren't there. But relatively little we just do things are available. So as you mentioned, Jessica, LS&A's work in this space is important work that I think came out of some of the conversations that came out of the Student Idea Board, and so LS&A deserves all the credit for that kind of movement. So that's and again, we still have ways to go, but that's the kind of way in which we work out of our office. And to make it, I just want to make it very clear that DEI includes disabilities. So that was a question and concern that was raised at the beginning. But I hope that question has been put to rest in some ways. We can always do more, and we'll continue to do more, but it is absolutely in that vision with regards to DEI.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sellers, for that. And also excellent opportunity to plug the Anti-Ableist Academy sessions that have been happening all month. Phenomenal, really informative, really inspirational, and lots of clear action steps to take away from all of this. And so if folks have not been checking it out, please do. So many recordings out there. Really, really important to catch all of us up that are maybe perhaps new to this conversation. This wraps up our formal pre-planned questions that we solicited from staff earlier in the year. And we're going to move now to some questions that have been popping up throughout our conversation this afternoon. And some of them we've already answered through the course of our conversation. For folks that are looking for that opportunity to engage that maybe haven't seen that, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen where you can type in a question. You can also upvote questions if you're especially interested in hearing an answer. And again, if we don't get to it, we have a Google Doc happening in the back that our panelists will all have as takeaways. So with that in mind, I just want to acknowledge one question that I could answer off the bat before we go to our panelists. There was an appropriate question and upvoted by several folks. Please describe the reasoning for having speakers and panelists introduce themselves using a form such as "my name is blank, I am blank, I am," and so on, and then describing ourselves. What are the pros and cons of opening in such a way? And so it's a fabulous question, and it was done very intentionally today to model for our folks on the call today how to incorporate the most inclusive conversation possible. And so you'll notice that there have been transcripts available throughout the entire session, and we've got cart services typing away everything that we're saying. And these are for our folks who may have visual impairments, may have auditory impairments. We don't want to presume that everybody's experience is the same. And so, as many of our panelists have said a few times today, you want to think about how to meet every single person, not just who you expect to be here or who you think the typical person is going to be, or wait for somebody to request a particular accommodation. You know, these are options out there, and just roll them out. One of the most amazing things that's come out of COVID is the benefits of Zoom that nobody anticipated. And so, for example, I forget people's names all the time, but now I have their name in front of me all the time. We have our pronouns, we can just put them up there. Having transcripts, you know, when we've gone back in person, a lot of folks with auditory impairments, it's especially challenging to hear their colleagues when they have masks on. That was not an issue when we were on Zoom and we had transcripts available. And so describing what you look like in person may be a new experience for you. It's still clunky for me, but it makes a lot of sense. I don't know what somebody could see. And you may have somebody who has colorblind issues. They may not be able to see at all. There's a whole range of differences in visual impairments. And so what we're trying to do for you today is to model it. The other nice benefit here in terms of the pros and the cons, you get to decide what you reveal. And so somebody may not share all of their identities when they introduce themselves, and someone else might. because it's either important that folks know that or it's important that folks don't know that. And you get to make that decision in terms of how much of your full self you want to bring to a meeting. But it's an excellent question, and we wanted to model it for you and also encourage you to try it out. See how it feels, see how your unit responds to it, and think about it in your, particularly in your larger group presentations or public presentations where you've got guests from the community joining you. It's a really inclusive practice, and one that I have learned just in my time engaging with the idea board and going to these different sessions this month. It's a pretty cool thing and makes a lot of sense. So that's that question. The next question is for our panel. DEI plans, initiatives happen on the broad scope, and this is great, but there are players in leadership roles that don't support what's taking place and are sometimes in a position to block them. So how do you address in your units any kind of resistance to DEI work to make sure that we're still staying true to the message and the vision and the values that we're espousing? And so I think we could all answer this at our individual levels, and I will open it to the whole panel to respond.
I can go ahead. I think Dr. Sellers, you have said it so beautifully, but and Dr. Brown as well, around, our roles as DEI leads and folks is oftentimes it isn't a power position in that way. It is a way of trying to help shine a light, like you've said so beautifully. And I think that is one of the most powerful things. I like to often sit with people who have opposite views of me, and so the person who is like the most averse to something, I'm always curious about why that is, and so I like to put my curiosity hat on, I like to say, and try to just kind of understand. And I think that's the most important, position as a human, is to kind of be curious, and particularly when people have maybe a power, if there's a power dynamic. And I think through that, try to understand, I have this experience, or I've had this experience. What has your experience been? Oftentimes with like continued conversation, people start to change. They don't change overnight. They don't change, it's not like they go for where I want them to be in 2 seconds, but it's that building the relationship and kind of helping people understand and unearth that shines a light differently. And so that's one of the most beautiful things I think that I've learned as a DEI lead. But then primarily when I was a clinical nursing director on a child psych unit, psych is something that is a huge stigma, and oftentimes people are very judgmental towards, unfortunately. And helping support psych mental health in the hospital is really still stigmatized. And so I kind of use that background of trying to help people understand oftentimes why are people stigmatized, or why do people, shine away from maybe persistent mental illnesses, that they might be scared, it might bring up something in them, in themselves. And that curiosity helps people kind of come along and maybe see the world in a little different way. And so I think that's how I've gone about it. And it might not be always the right way, but I think that curiosity when people are averse helps us understand more greatly. And it kind of helps us tune into how do we have those difficult conversations, which so oftentimes we shy away from. It's easier to write people off and say they're just barriers. It's much harder to sit with them and kind of rumble around and try to kind of make each other better. So that's my thought process on that.
Oh, yeah, I just want to build on that, because I think that's so key. I think for me, I often pull on my social work skills and, the training that I've done through IGR, the program on intergroup relations, and thinking about like how we engage in dialogue and how we engage in conversation. I think, this piece that you're talking about relationships is really key. And so often when I think about resistance or people who may not quite understand what we're doing and why we're doing it and why we're investing and why it's so important, I do think that curiosity is important and hearing where they're coming from. But also I think it's long-term work. it's often like, the conversations that we're having now, it's like, I just want to continue to, delve into that conversation more, just hear where you're coming from and share where I'm coming from. And I think over time, people are, even if they don't necessarily change their minds, they might be more open to hearing. And I do think sometimes strategically, I also think about hearing it from me may not be the best receiver, like if, sometimes identity comes into play when you're engaging in these conversations, or your positionality. So thinking about, okay, who are people that they might be able to receive this information from, or hear it in a different way. And so just thinking about like who our allies are in this work too, I think is sometimes a way that we have to navigate it.
And I like to add as well, the question asked about leadership and blocking, and I haven't noticed as much blocking, more so not being aware, not having the knowledge, not really understanding why this is important. But I haven't seen overt blocking myself, although it might be subtle. Some of the things that I've done for people who I feel could use more awareness and knowledge is put them in positions that they could learn those things. And some of those are like conversations or that Nicole talked about. Some of those are being on important committees with, DEI or anti-racism. And so, I suggested that a few key leaders be on some of our anti-racism oversight committee subcommittees. And the goal for that is to really help them along their journeys, that really understand why this is important. Instead of we're just doing this to help certain individuals. It's not about that. It's about equity and inclusion. Another thing that I think is important, there's some people that we're just never going to reach. And so in leadership positions, one of the things that I'm excited about Michigan Medicine is that in many of the upper level leadership positions, there are term limits. And so that gives you an opportunity to set your values, and select people who align with our diversity, equity, and inclusion values. So many of our chairs have overturned. We have a very young group of chairs who we picked who value diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, and that is building a lot of momentum, and it's also a big barrier against any potential resistance, because so many of our new leaders are very much on board with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, and I would just also say from a slightly different, well, an additional perspective, I shouldn't say different perspective. So we often talk about hoping to win folks over, to win over minds and hearts to DEI. For me, in terms of my long-term goals, I would love for everybody to see the value and the importance of it. But with the goal of long-term institutional change, that's not something I spend a whole lot of time losing sleep over. I want to create structures, I want to create policies, I want to create a culture where we're trying to be more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive in all that we do, such that individuals who don't want to do that aren't able to expand or to progress in the institution. I think of it as I use this example sometimes. So as a member of the university and the university administration, I have a fiduciary responsibility to spend the university's money in wise and principled ways, to be fiscally responsible. Now, I don't necessarily have to agree or disagree with it. I just have to do it. So I might think, it's a really good idea that I should be able to buy a big screen TV on my university card. That's my personal feeling, that I think that would help the university out, because it'll allow me to watch the games on TV and I'll come in more relaxed and I'll do a better job, et cetera. But I don't do that because that is against the ethos of the university and ultimately could very much result in me losing job, if not going to jail. So my long-term goal isn't so much to get everybody on board. I hope everyone's on board and understands why we do it, but every day we do a lot of different things that we don't necessarily either agree with or spend a whole lot of time agreeing with, but we recognize that that's part of what being a part of this community means, or being a part of this organization means. And so while I do want to try to win people over because I think it is right, it makes sense, it's the best strategy for the organization, et cetera, ultimately, the goal is to create structures, to create ethos, to create traditions, whatever you want to call it, that drives behavior. Because in the end, as a psychologist, one of the ironies is we often think that attitudes and beliefs drive behavior. In reality, it's the other way around, that behavior tends to change attitudes and beliefs before attitudes and beliefs change behavior. And so part of my vision of what we have to do is to also make it very clear, this is what being a good member of this community requires. Is that we see things in ways that are diverse, equitable, and inclusive. That's why we want to put it into our policies, our procedures, our practices, as well as, and to reward the behavior that is consistent with that, and to have consequences for behavior that's not consistent with that. That's ultimately what will result in the long-term sustainable change in the institution.
Thank you so much for very powerful answers. So many good nuggets in there. We are approaching time, and one of those questions that's come up, I just want folks to know the next year is on assessment. What have we learned? And then the next year is future planning. What do we want to do next? I want to thank our panelists today for really thoughtful answers and all the tremendous work that you have been doing over many, many years. I'm so glad that so many folks were able to join us. We exceeded 200 participants at one point today. So this was well received, and there are a lot of really thoughtful responses of folks who also appreciate you and everything that you're doing. So to Lauren Davis, to Nicole Figueroa, Dr. Brown, and Dr. Sellers, thank you so much. And I look forward to working with everyone soon.